Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Humanities, SOH. Certificate in the Teaching of English as a Second Language, CTE, revised. Compulsory, CTE 103 Teaching Strategies. Block 1 The Teacher in the Classroom. Unit-2 Daily Lesson Plans and Strategies for Classroom Transaction 1, 2.1 Introduction in any teaching learning program. Two complementary aspects are working simultaneously. First, the pre-designed and predetermined inputs which are associated with the prescribed syllabus and textbooks, and then the dynamic and unpredictable process of implementing such a broad scheme in a unique setting. These unique and real settings are the classrooms in which particular groups of learners, guided by their teachers as well as other inputs from them, participate in activities in ways which suit their individual styles. In fact, the teacher's job is to adapt what is provided to her as a given, i.e. the syllabus and coursebook, to the local situation, the characteristics of the particular student in a class. In this unit, our main aim is to help you gain an appreciation of both aspects of teaching learning process, i.e. the support that you receive from a pre-arranged syllabus and the unpredictable implementing of this syllabus to a discrete set of learners. 2.2 Objectives. This unit deals with teaching learning in the classroom setting where curriculum transaction is primarily located. The teacher takes the lead in generating learning experiences for the student. After going through this unit, you should be able to develop an awareness and appreciation of the nature of learning experiences that can be generated in classrooms. Differentiate between teaching a body of content and facilitating skill development. Appreciate and identify learner diversity as a positive learning resource. Promote participation of students as partnership with the teacher in the teaching learning process, and understand the nature of planning for English lessons. 2.3 Instruction in the classroom. From coursebook to lessons, learning in different domains, especially learning languages, takes place in various contexts. The settings range from natural and informal to planned and highly structured environments. Developments in technology have extended the possible settings and modes of teaching learning. At the same time, formal instruction in classrooms remains the most common arrangement at the school level. When we talk about the classroom, we are actually referring to the activity during lessons of 40 minutes. The physical classroom can be the traditional single room, a part of a larger hall, bounded by curtains or wooden screens, a veranda, or a space under a tree. It is like a stage on which curriculum transaction is acted out. Our focus now is on the general features of the process, the lessons that occur hour after hour, day after day, under the supervision of the teacher. 2.3.1 Adapting the course to the particular class. The syllabus textbook package for each grade level provides a general framework. The ideas and suggestions in it have to be made real as learning activities in actual lessons. While doing this, the general plan has to be adapted by the teacher to suit the learners in her own, unique class. Such adaptation is one of the most important responsibilities of the teacher. It is only the teacher who knows the group of students in her class as learners, their general academic level, their wider knowledge and interests, their ways of interacting with one another, and especially what they have studied recently. To get a better picture of the process of adaptation, let us consider a teacher providing individual instruction to a child who is unable to attend regular school. This could be happening for various reasons: the need to rest after a serious illness, an orthopedic condition, and so on. Remember that such homeschooling is not private tuition, which is always in addition to regular instruction at school. The teacher matches her teaching to the needs of this individual learner. This is done by modifying the complexity of presentation, the speed or pace of coverage, the nature of explanations and illustrations, the extent of repetitions and review, etc. The classroom teacher with her group of 40-odd learners faces a similar challenge. Certain topics might be quite new and difficult for these learners, or it could be old matter which is being repeated and seem boring to them. Some warming up and special preparation is done by many teachers before a new topic is taken up. Often this means going back to earlier lessons and recalling specific ideas to provide a helpful starting base. Sometimes, parts of what is in the current unit of the textbook can be skipped or left for students to read on their own, or postponed for the time being. Sometimes additional material or activity not given in the book might be appropriate. These are some of the decisions that the classroom teacher has to take, every day in fact. The adaptation occurring in each classroom is unique. Even in parallel sections in the same school, there will be differences in the way lessons on the same topic take shape. At the same time, we have to be realistic and recognize the limitations of group instruction. While each learner is unique, all her personal needs cannot be met by a single teacher. Genuine individualization is not possible in the classroom setting. But the teacher does have a good sense of the general level of ability or readiness of her group, and some awareness of their different styles of learning and interests. So she can modify and extend the standard or common matter given in the course book units in ways that could help most of her students. This flexibility in teacher-managed classroom lessons is unique. Such curriculum transaction in classrooms is very different from what learners find in distance mode or technology, satellite TV, computer-based instruction. 2.3.2 The class as a social group. Children have always been put into classes of the same broad age level. This makes educational sense, but administrative convenience and efficiency are also major considerations. We, teachers and parents, often complain about group instruction, especially because paying individual attention to students in large classes is difficult. At the same time, we must note that the social context of the classroom is a positive feature. It is natural for children to be with others. In fact, this is what they desire. When children want to go out to play, it is always to play with others. Parents usually get anxious when a child shows a lack of interest in interacting with other children. However, traditionally, when a classroom lesson begins, students are expected to ignore one another and pay attention only to the teacher. All of us have memories of teachers who were very strict in this regard. However, each one of us knows that no teacher has ever succeeded in totally eliminating interaction involving mild levels of distraction and mischief during lessons. Serious indiscipline which disrupts lessons is of course unacceptable. But the image of the ideal lesson with silent and serious children listening to the teacher is changing. Classrooms and lessons in which there is activity and fun, in frequent spells at least, is becoming the norm. We will see that peers are in various ways an important resource for the emotional and social development of all children. Many desirable aspects of development depend on contact and interaction with other children, and this is something group instruction makes available all the time. 2.3.3 Diversity in the classroom. While formal schooling places children of approximately the same age together in the same class, there are always individual differences amongst them. These differences are invariably quite large since children come from different families and social backgrounds. As we know, even twins are not exactly alike. Some of the complaints about large classes relate to the range of differences among the children present. This variation can be seen as a burden. How can the teacher do justice to toppers and to very weak students during a single lesson? Is a question often asked. This is a challenge and there is no easy solution. But this view of the problem assumes that all students must learn the same things in the same way and produce the same right answers in tests. Today, we do not believe that this is the most important function of school. In this perspective, we see diversity as a resource and potential advantage. Earlier, most discussions about individuals' differences, especially among teachers and parents, took only two dimensions seriously. One was academic ability, which leads to high or low marks on formal tests. The other was motivation, which differentiates the serious and hardworking students from those who are not. This was based on a very narrow view of good and poor learners. Today we recognize better that children in school come from many cultural backgrounds. Quite naturally they have varied likes and dislikes, and also many types of talents and interests, and so on. This shows us that children have different patterns of strengths and weaknesses. No child is by nature a weak or poor learner. Each one learns in different ways and at different rates and is good in some areas and less so in others. Teachers need to recognize this diversity of potential. Then they can help students also to appreciate that every child has something to share with others. Developing such attitudes in classroom lessons and in the school generally would be a great contribution to the morale of individual children. 2.3.4 The emerging pattern of lessons, taking advantage of diversity, participation and partnership. We generally view diversity now more as an advantage than a problem. What does this mean? How can diversity be brought in as a resource that enriches activity in classrooms? A principle that we noted earlier is helpful here. What students gain from school is not only what is given in textbooks, but something wider and richer. This new knowledge comes from relating ideas given in the books to life outside school. This means importantly the child's life. Each child has to be actively involved in learning as only she can make the link to her life. For this to happen, children should have opportunities to express their own ideas and experiences by speaking, writing, drawing, and acting. Classroom lessons should have spells in which there is student activity involving talk or discussion. Pair work and group work are very useful here. This points to a new meaning of the expression, active learners. Instead of only receiving the knowledge in the book as presented by the teacher, students contribute their own ideas to the new knowledge created in the classroom. From the perspective of enhancing the motivation of the learners, discussion in the classroom has a great advantage. It is a space in which there are no correct answers. It is possible in the first round of discussion at least to treat whatever a child says as worth accepting, without any judgment. Obviously, anything and everything that is said should not to be uncritically taken as valid or true. The ideas put forward should be clarified and refined thoughtfully. This happens best through a process of listening to and learning from peers, rather than from correction by teachers. As these different opinions are heard, a child might change her ideas. This would be genuine learning, because the changes come from better understanding, and are not only a matter of knowing correct answers. The motivational advantage is great for so-called weak or shy students. They would feel encouraged to express their ideas in such an atmosphere because the risk of being wrong and being criticized for it is low. These activities in which learners participate actively are also important for the teacher who needs to get to know her students. In the conventional class, the learners are listening most of the time, and conventional tests only show how much they have learned. When they express themselves as described above, they give a chance to the teacher to learn about their point of view and ways of thinking. Such knowledge will help her planning activities and in identifying those most in need of individual attention. Discussions based on students' ideas can also raise the general motivation and encourage class participation because learners see that their ideas are considered as important in addition to what is in textbooks. The teacher should be able to judge how to bring in such discussions in a way that supports the main aim of lessons in progress. The important point is that what is given in textbooks, based on a planned syllabus, is related to children's lives. Simply letting children talk without some plan is not of much value. Discussions in which children share their ideas provide a valuable opportunity for children to listen to and learn from one another. Through lessons including discussions, students see or experience diversity in a real manner. It is a step towards learning to accept and respect others, who are different. Which is what valuing diversity means. 2.3.5 Features of a learner-centered pedagogy. What we have discussed above helps us to understand the meaning of the now fairly common statement that the teacher should not teach, but rather should be more a facilitator and partner. Thus, the older notion of teaching as almost entirely teacher-centered has to change. Teachers and teaching are still very important. The older approach emphasized transmitting knowledge in a way that everyone gets the same input, with some students learning and remembering more and others learning less. Today the emphasis is on adaptation of the general plan using the contributions of learners to enrich lessons. Clearly the teacher has an important role here. Facilitating learning involves the teacher's interaction with learners, not only the presenting of subject matter, talking to them. Such classroom activity calls for skill and resourcefulness on the part of the teacher. This is far more demanding than preparing and delivering conventional lessons. A possible new image for the classroom lesson is the discussion, in which many persons participate, rather than the lecture, in which one person talks. These types of lessons obviously require a high level of student participation in various activities. One of the major challenges facing the teacher is to get many or most students to participate. One feasible and productive way of managing this is to introduce activities involving working together in pairs and small groups. In these decentralized activities, students talk more to one another than to the teacher. Especially when they have to collaborate and do something together, they will have to talk. The teacher observes and monitors and sometimes joins the group for a few minutes. Quite often there will be some output from the pair or group. The teacher arranges for this to be shared with the whole class. Such activity would lead to the production of a range of language texts. These can supplement the language samples in the book and the teacher's notes. Note that such output is different from what is produced by students working on their own, individual seat work, which mostly involves exercises or problems with correct answers. The activities taken up in pair, group work are more open-ended and lead to ideas and suggestions for discussion rather than fixed correct answers. The challenge for the teacher is to utilize these texts and ideas coming from students in various ways in later lessons. As she gains skill in doing this, there is more real contribution by students to the learning process. This is also a way of reducing the dominance of textbook-based content and concentrating what the learner has to say or do, and this is especially relevant for language instruction. The type of lessons discussed above include both active participation and the contribution of students, small but important, to the curricular process. This points to classroom setting in which the teacher and her students are beginning to work together to transact the curriculum. The notions of teacher as partner and participating in the construction of knowledge come from the classroom processes activated by such techniques. In the next section we look at the implications of these ideas and perspectives for the language classroom. 2.4 Key features of language lessons. In the previous section we have noted some of the features of classroom-based instruction guided by the learner-centered approach. Special emphasis was given to the role of learners as active participants in the process. Obviously, the nature of the subject matter in the syllabus will influence how lessons actually take shape. We can expect English lessons to be different from those of other subjects. For millions of school children, with practically no contact with English in the home and neighborhood, English lessons in classrooms will be the only means of learning the language. So making English lessons effective for all is a challenge. Let us try now to find out how the objectives and pedagogic approach of English courses help learning in the classroom. 2.4.1 The subject matter of English courses. A distinction is generally made in the overall school syllabus between skill-oriented subjects like language and content-oriented subjects like history. Obviously, these are not neat and watertight compartments, but there is an important difference. The syllabus for content subjects, history, math, environmental studies, etc., lists a number of topics which represent a body of knowledge. This is made up of information, technical terms, concepts and principles associated with the subject, which is often a field of specialization at the university level. The main objective of instruction is to help students gain both knowledge of facts and terminology and understanding of concepts and principles. The central objective of teaching language, especially English taught as a second or foreign language, is different. It is for the student to gain the ability to use language for communication, to express ideas in speech and writing, and understand what is in spoken and written texts. English language course books have traditionally had an anthology structure. Here, the anchor of the typical unit is a prose passage or a poem. Most of the exercises are linked to these texts. They deal with the ideas, comprehension, and the language forms illustrated in them. We need to be clear about the function of these texts in a language course. It is essentially to provide samples of the language in use, which in turn facilitates exposure to our contact with the language. Materials developers follow principles of curriculum design when selecting and ordering these texts, as we will see in later units. The texts illustrate language forms, words, grammatical structures, spelling, etc., using the content, themes, as a medium. The structure of the language, rules of grammar, spelling, word formation, pronunciation, has to be learned, but only to be able to use them with fluency and accuracy. However, it is important for a teacher of English to have the knowledge of the structure of English. But the learner in class 4 or 7 needs to learn these rules in a different way. They should be able to apply them when using the language, rather than just know them. All the technical information related to them is not needed. So we have to be careful not to make the English lesson look too much like a linguistics lesson. A helpful distinction to keep in mind is that between learning to use language and learning about language. Similarly, we need to be clear about the role of the specific content, information and ideas, in the texts. Each text has to be understood by the student, reader, just as a listener needs to understand what a speaker says to her. As the student tries to understand the text, some help, clue or explanation from the teacher is often necessary. But after the text has been understood to some degree, the specific details are no longer of relevance for language learning. These ideas, relating to the discovery of penicillin, migration of birds, customs of some community, incidents and characters in a story, and so on, serve mainly as illustrations of language in use. The widening of the student's general knowledge is useful as a bonus, but it is not the primary aim. What is learnt about the way language forms convey meaning in the text is more important. This knowledge becomes a resource for understanding and for producing texts. Unfortunately, as we know, the content of these texts in language has been a major focus. A large proportion of examination questions simply ask for memorized information from them. Students get high marks for remembering details from these texts. This focus changes English into a content subject, which it certainly is not. In a history or chemistry or biology course, the content, specific ideas, in the textbook is central, and teaching and testing focus on this body of knowledge. This is what makes a content subject fundamentally different from a skill subject like language. So we need to keep the purpose for which texts are included in mind, when using them as a resource for language learning. However, there is a problem regarding the language curriculum that needs to be sorted out. The argument above is that neither information about the English language as a system nor the ideas in passages and poems are central to the language curriculum. What does it consist of then? Language is learnt most successfully by experiencing its use. This does not mean that learners have to talk and write, produce complex texts most of the time. What it means is that during lessons they should get opportunities to experience language in use, exposure to texts that need to be understood, and situations where ideas need to be expressed in texts they produce. A major part of the experiences in the language class should be similar to those of the child acquiring a language naturally through exposure to its use in everyday communication. A point to note here is that the child usually experiences only spoken language in use in the world outside, while the child in class deals more with the written language found in books. 2.4.2 Transactions in the classroom setting. We see now that the main teaching objective guiding English lessons should be to provide experiences of using language to learners. We need to exploit the range of language texts given in the course books in a manner that provides these experiences. The English teacher has certain advantages over the subject teacher when dealing with the textbook. The typical English textbook contains a wide range of texts, stories, poems, plays, essays, comic strips, cartoons, posters, advertisements, etc. When selecting these, the interests of children of the given age are an important consideration. Some principle of gradation is applied in deciding the sequence of units. But the book does not have to be followed strictly page by page. Jumping ahead to pick up something from a later unit because it seems especially interesting and relevant at some point is possible and indeed desirable. Unusual current events prominent in the media could be the reason, medals at the Olympics, an invention, a spacecraft reaching Mars, some curious incident involving animals, etc. What is in the book can be supplemented or even replaced by some other text. A text which is seen as interesting can be taken up for some purpose even if it has a new grammatical form or a couple of difficult words. These language items do not have to be taught and finished immediately. They will appear over and over again in the same year and in the curriculum of higher classes. The flexibility in choosing the text and related activity allows the teacher to give priority to students getting involved in the tasks. This essentially means that learners attempt to understand what is current and express their view about the same. Such efforts to use their partial knowledge of language will of course not be wholly successful. The teacher can provide support, guidance and encouragement. Because an activity is of interest to the student, they are more accepting of inputs from the teacher. This readiness to receive teacher inputs is a great advantage, especially ideal for language learning. Compared with this, the teacher of a content subject, who also has well-designed textbooks as support, has to work with many restrictions. The given sequence of topics, subtopics has to be followed. Extra material if used must help to illustrate and explain a difficult concept. There is less scope for going in different directions. In the language class, on the other hand, it is the activity that matters, and any text, whatever the topic, that students are likely to engage with is acceptable. A second advantage that the English teacher enjoys when using language text in class is related to the way in which they are to be treated. Obviously, students should understand what is in the texts, whether it is written passages and now increasingly, recorded spoken texts. But it is not necessary to aim for complete comprehension immediately. After some sense of the overall nature and message has been gained, many questions for discussion can be raised. Who created it? Who is the sender, author? Who is it addressed to? Why was it created? When? Where? Could the same message have been conveyed in some other ways? Will other receivers respond in the same way? Students themselves might suggest some of the questions. These are the open-ended questions facilitating discussion that we noted above. The point here is not that dozens of trivial comprehension questions must be asked in relation to every passage. In fact, these are not comprehension questions as such. They are, rather, ways of helping students see that texts represent an act of communication between a sender and a receiver, or receivers. Learners are also able to see that there is often more to the message than the explicit meaning of the sentences. Creating an interest in going back to the text to understand it better should also be among the teacher's aim. Discussion based on such questions on different texts would lead students to pay attention to words, grammatical elements, and also gradually to organization and style. Another advantage of English lessons lies in the space for open-ended questions and tasks, many of which do not lead to single correct answers. Such tasks can take off from the texts, dramatization, role play, expressing some aspects in a picture or cartoon, imagining different endings for stories, finding or remembering other very similar or dissimilar texts. They provide learners with opportunities to use language, and many are suitable for pair, group work. The absence of right answers allows students to engage with tasks following their own interests, attitudes and styles, which is important for their motivation and morale. A caution needs to be noted here. The texts, samples of language, in the course books and others used are an important base and learning resource for those who have very low exposure to English outside class, or are less confident about expressing their own ideas initially. Going beyond the text is easier for students whose skill level is higher. While these further creative activities are desirable, the initial opportunity to learn from the given text should not be lost for those who need it. The point about not focusing only on specific content does not mean neglecting the given texts. The experience and expertise of materials developers has gone into them. The general principle for language instruction that emerges from this discussion is that the language lesson should provide for a variety of open-ended tasks demanding attention and effort from all the pupils. There should also be some measure of interaction or communication among them. Of course, the use of English is to be encouraged, but the occasional use of the L1 is not in any way undesirable. However, the use of this support should gradually be decreased. This will happen naturally as the ability to use English increases. As noted earlier, presentation and explanation by the teacher, to which pupils listen, should be only one of the strands in lessons. Learner activity should be planned as a major lesson component, and not merely something to be taken up, time permitting, after the teacher has finished her part. But learner activity is not an end itself. It has to be planned, when, and how, so that relevant learning experiences are generated. Simply reducing teacher talk will not automatically lead to better language learning. 2.5 Planning at the level of the teacher. We have noted that the individual teacher is working within the framework represented by the syllabus and course materials. In a typical school, the academic calendar for the year, agreed upon at a general staff meeting, will indicate the number of hours, periods for each subject over a term, weekly timetable, dates for units tests and term end tests, and so on. So a lot of planning is already in place. The teacher's real work of planning begins when a unit in the syllabus, course book has to be taken up and covered in, say, about 8 lessons spread over 2 weeks. However elaborate the course book, it will not, and cannot, indicate in detail the transactions for each lesson, involving 40 particular learners and their teacher. We noted earlier that only the teacher knows the background and readiness of the group for the matter in the new unit. She can judge whether some revision or special preparation is necessary, and some supplementary material would be useful. She uses this knowledge to work out the overall teaching plan for the unit and for each lesson. The skill development orientation of language teaching, which is different from that of body of knowledge based content subjects, is important. The English teacher has much less presenting to do, but much more organization of learners' activity. For the subject teacher, the planning and preparation for a lesson will be based centrally on the topic. How can I best explain this concept? What types of exercises, problems will help consolidate the new ideas? For the English teacher, the central questions would be, given the theme, story, passage, dialogue, puzzle, serving as the base, how can I get my learners to use the ideas or situations or characters they come across in order to participate in tasks, activities requiring them to read or speak or write? Most course books today include several activities in each unit, usually related to a set of texts, both spoken and written. These represent the language exposure students receive in a given lesson. Other lessons will give them exposure to different samples. The teacher can select what would be most appropriate, and sometimes modify them. As noted in section 2.4.2, it is possible, even desirable sometimes, to jump to something in a later unit if it seems appropriate. The next step is to decide what kind of revision and/or special preparation the students need so that the text and activities seem manageable to them. Sometimes this could be through presentation and explanation of some concept or principle by the teacher. This will help in getting the students get started on the activities on the right lines. After that, the teacher has to observe and step in where help seems needed. These are occasions when the teacher's input can be very effective, because of the need and readiness we noted above. The important principle is that they cannot be planned in the usual sense, as they emerge in an unpredictable way. This means thinking ahead and anticipating some likely responses of learners, good and smart or partially correct, appropriate or wrong because of misunderstandings, or reflecting lack of interest and carelessness. The question to ask is, what should I do if this happens? Some preparation can be done in this way, which becomes part of the overall plan. Obviously, everything that could happen cannot be anticipated correctly, but having some options ready will help the teacher. Thus, the teacher's plan should include various options for each stage, rather than a set of fixed steps, as in a recipe. The options are a resource base which can be drawn on in a dynamic manner as the lesson progresses. 2.6 Summary. In this unit, we have looked at the main features of classroom-based instruction, which is in the hands of the teacher. We noted how the older view of good lessons as efficient transmitters of predetermined knowledge to students who silently receive what is given is being replaced by the image of lessons with learners actively participating, contributing with their ideas, often enriching what the teacher presents. Organizing such instruction requires more skill and effort than conventional teaching. We learned that in such a learner-centered view, diversity in a class is an advantage rather than a burden. We went on to look at the essential features of English language instruction which is different from that for content subjects. We noted that materials should expose learners to language texts, and classroom transactions should provide opportunities for learners to try and comprehend texts and express their ideas using whatever language they know at any stage. We learned that planning English lessons involves using the syllabus, textbook matter as a base and preparing a range of possible activities which will be taken up in a flexible manner because the classroom process is somewhat unpredictable. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.